Hi class, this is Dr. Karsten, and I want to go over some of the homework problems that you are doing today. Today I decided to do an extra day in Lesson 12, and this is Module 5, Grade 4 from EngageNY. And we were doing problems from the Lesson 12 homework pages, not the classwork, so make sure you're in the correct pages. So let's take a look at what the instructions are. It says compare the fractions given below by writing greater than or less than on the lines. Give a brief explanation for each answer referring to the benchmark of 0, half, and 1. I'm not going to go into detail about how we do this and what benchmarks are because I did that in the lesson and I really explained it quite in depth. So I'm just going to jump right into the problems because I know some of you are still struggling with this. If you have questions after you watch this video, you know you can come and meet me in our Google Meet sessions and we'll chat about it and we'll solve it together. So let's take a look at this. Now, I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently because I want to explain it more thoroughly. So I'm actually going to be sketching things out for you to really help you understand. But you would just have to actually answer it and then explain how you looked at each of those fractions based on benchmarks of 0, 1 half, and 1. So really quickly, let's take a look at 1 half and 1 fourth. And if I want to compare those two fractions, since the numerator is the same, I can actually just focus on my denominator. And I can say, hey, look, here I have halves, here I have fourths. When I divide something into two pieces, those pieces are much bigger than when I have fourths and I've divided something into 4 pieces. So I already know that 1 half is going to be bigger than 1 fourth, but I have to be able to explain it using benchmarks. Well, 1 half is easy enough because I can just say that 1 half is equal to 1 half. So that's nice and easy. But what about this 1 fourth? Where would that be located on a number line? So if I were using a number line, I'm going to slide this over a little. If I were using a number line, remember that my number lines are always going to have the benchmarks of 0, 1 half, oh, and 1. That should be a 1. Sorry about that, guys. I got distracted hearing my girls in the other room. So I have 0, 1 half, and 1. Where would 1 fourth fall? Well, let's first rewrite these, and I think this was helpful when we did this in our Google Meet. Let's rewrite that, all these benchmarks, as fourths really quick. So 0 would just be 0 fourths. 1 would be 4 fourths because my numerator and denominator, when they match, it's 1 whole. And then over here, in the middle, what I have to ask myself is, what is half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. So once we figured out, and I don't know if you noticed a little blip there, but my girls were getting noisy, I had to go and shush them. Once you know where your 0, your half, and your 1 is, and we've turned them into fourths just to help us out right now, now I can take a look and say to myself, well, where would 1 fourth be? And I can see that it would be between the 0 fourths and the 2 fourths, and it's going to be right halfway. So that's where my 1 fourth would be right here. And we already, like I said, have 1 half, it's right here. So now I can see that 1 half is larger than 1 fourth. You can see that because a fourth is closer to the 0, so it's smaller, whereas 1 half is further away. Or you could say that 1 half is closer to 1, so it's larger. So either way you can look at it, that would work. So now what I'm going to do is for 1 fourth to explain it, I can say that 1 fourth is between, and now I want to talk about my benchmark, so don't say between 0 fourths and 2 fourths, say that it's between 0 and 1 half. So I'm going to write it is between 0 and 1 half. So this was 1a from the homework. So I'm not going to rewrite all of this. Well, for one of them, for the first one I will. So again, I'm going to write that 1 half is larger than 1 fourth. And then what you would write is 1 half is equal to 1 half. So we're talking about the benchmark 1 half. And then here I'd say that 1 fourth is between 0 and 1 half. And it's actually exactly halfway between the two. Okay, so let's take a look at B. So B is asking us to compare 6/8 and 1 half. So again, we're lucky because we have one of those benchmarks. So let me write it down for us. So we're doing 1b, and we're looking at 6/8, and we're comparing it to 1/2. So let's let this take over our page now. So again, I'm going to go ahead, and even though for this we didn't have to use the number line, I know that some of you are still kind of working on understanding this, so I am going to go ahead and draw it out. I put my 3 benchmarks, 0, 1/2, and 1. So let's figure out, well, 1/2 is easy. We know that 1/2 is right here, because 1/2 is 1/2. And we could say that again, 1/2 is equal to 1/2. But then if I wanted to show 6/8, again, let's turn these benchmarks into eighths. So I know that at 0, I have 0/8. I know that at 1, I have 8/8. What would my halfway mark be? What would my 1/2 be? Well, what's half of 8? Half of 8 is 4. So now what I can do is I can say to myself, well, that means that 6/8 is going to have to be between 4 and 8/8. It's somewhere in here. And I could really quickly say to myself, oh, well, I have 5/8, 6/8, 7/8. Look, it's exactly in the middle of those two. So I know that 6/8 would fall right there. So now I know that 6/8 is bigger. And now let's go back to our problem set over here. So I'm going to say that 6/8 is bigger, so the alligator eats the bigger number. And the first thing I'm going to say is that 1/2 is equal to 1/2. And the other thing that I want to say is that 6/8 is between 1/2 and 1. Because that's where it fell. It fell between 1/2 and 1. All right, let's take a look at problem 1C. So I'm going to jot that down for us. So in problem 1C, we are comparing 3/4 and 3/5. Now again, I know I said this earlier, when your numerator is the same, you can actually just look at your denominators and think which is bigger and which is smaller. If I cut up a cake into 4 slices, each slice is bigger than if I cut it into 5 slices. I would rather share with fewer friends so I can have more cake. So I could right away just go ahead and say that this is going to be larger because each one of those pieces is larger and I have the same number of pieces. Now I'm going to also remind you that with fifths, things are a little strange with fifths. I want to sketch that out for us beforehand before we go into this and just remind you how fifths work. So if I have fifths, I can't split it right in the middle. It doesn't work that way. When I'm working with fifths, here I have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. Let me translate this onto a number line for us to look at. Ooh, I should have made it a little longer. So I'm going to mark all my fifths on here. So sorry, let's kind of make that extend it. And I would have here 0/5. 1/5, so I've gone 1/5, 1 hop, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give us like a little dotted line where I'm dividing it in half. If I were to divide this in half, it's going to be right in the middle is right here, and you can see that none of my fifths align themselves with what 1/2 is. So this is 1/2. But I can describe all of my fifths. So for example, 1/5 is between, now remember this is 1, this is 1/2, and this is 0. Oh my goodness, and this is 1. So what I can do is I can say that 1/5 is between 0 and 1/2, but it's closer to the 0. I can say that 2/5 is between 0 and 1/2, but it's closer to 1/2. I can say that 3/5 is between 1/2 and 1, remember that this is 1, but that it's closer to 1/2, and I can say that 4/5 is also between 1/2 and 1, but it's closer to the 5/5. So when I'm looking at this, now I can really understand that 3/5 is going to be between 1/2 and 1, but it's closer to the 1/2. So I'm going to actually redraw this on another number line for us to work with for this problem. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know if you noticed, I just had to pause again. My kid's Chromebook locked her out. All of a sudden it just shut down on her, so we had to fix it. So I'm sorry, but let's go ahead and let's draw another number line for us to work with. So this one's going to be a clean one. So we have 0, we have 1/2, I'm putting our benchmarks on, and 1. And what we figured out was that 3/5 was going to be between 1/2 and 1, but closer to the 1/2. So I'm going to put it right about there. So now let's look at 3/4. So if I'm looking at 3/4 and I want to figure out where it is, let me turn my benchmarks into fourths. So I'm going to have 0/4, I'm going to have 4/4. And then for the halfway mark, what is half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. So 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. So now I have to figure out where would my 3/4 be? Well, if you look, if I have 2/4 here, and I have, oops, sorry about that, and I have 4/4 over here, 3/4 is going to be halfway between them. It's going to be exactly halfway. So I'm going to go ahead and mark my 3/4 halfway. Because I'd have 2/4, then I would have 3/4, and I would have 4/4. So with that written, now you can see that 3/4, sure enough, is bigger than 3/5, which is exactly what we wrote. So now let me put this over here onto the page that we're working on. And what I have is that 3/4 is going to be larger than 3/5. And what we know is that 3/4 is halfway between the benchmarks of 1/2 and 1. And the other thing I know is that 3/5 is between 1/2 and 1 and closer to 1/2. So since it's closer to the half than 3/4, we know that it was smaller. So that's the reasoning that we're using for this one. All right, let's take a look at D. And I'm just checking to make sure everything's running, and it looks like it's running okay. So if I'm looking at D, I see that let me grab a new piece of paper, that 4/6 is being compared to 3/9. So let me write that for us. So this is 3D, and we're comparing 4/6 and 9/12. I don't know what I just said before. Okay, so let's take a look at this problem together. So if I'm looking at 4/6 and 9/12, again, I'm going to go ahead and just for our purposes, I'm going to do a quick sketch. I'm going to put in my benchmarks to explain this to you guys a little better. So let's take a look at 4/6. So if I'm looking at 4/6, let me jot in what my benchmarks would be for 4/6 in sixth. So I'm going to make 0/6. I have 6/6 because that's equal to 1. And then half of 6 is 3. So if half of 6 is 3, now I know that 4/6, I'd have 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, 6/6. So 4/6 is going to be closer to 3/6, which is 1/2, and it's going to be between 1/2 and 1. And that's how I would explain it. I would say that 4/6 is between 1/2 and 1, but closer to 1/2. So now let's work with our 9/12. So let's take our 12ths and let's turn them into our benchmarks again to think about it this way. So I'd have 0/12, 12/12, and half of 12 is going to be 6. So where would 9/12 be? Is it going to be between 0 and 6 or between 6 and 12? Well, and I can jot these in. I would have 7/12, 8/12. Wow, I'm not even leaving myself enough room to work with. I would have 7/12, 8/12, 9/12, 10/12, and 11/12 squished in there. And look, the 9/12 is right in between those, halfway. So 9/12 is going to be right around there. So now what I can see is that 9/12 is definitely going to be bigger than my 4/6. And I can write that. Now let me show you how we would write that using this information that we have. So let me move things up so we have enough room. So again, we know that 9/12 is larger than 4/6. And first let me talk about my 4/6. So remember, 4/6 is between 1/2 and 1, closer to 1/2. So 4/6 is between 1/2 and 1, closer to 1/2. I'm squeezing it in. Let me slide it over. 9/12 is between 1/2 and 1, and it's literally right in between. It's halfway. So I'm just going to write halfway. I should have written it before. I could have said is halfway between. So if you want to be better, squeeze that in over there. Oh wait, not there. Here. Sorry guys. There we go. Okay, so 9/12 is halfway between 1/2 and 1. If you wrote this, I would accept that. That's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at 3e. So 3e is asking us, I have too much stuff here. So 3e is having us look at 2/3 and 1/4. So I have 2/3 and 1/4. So I'm jotting those down. Now 2/3 is another, dealing with thirds is another one of those that I want to emphasize to you, the same way I did with the fifths, that it does not have a perfect half when we're working with it. So let me divide this up as best as I can into thirds. And when I divide this into thirds, I can now move this onto my number line. So I have 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So if I'm looking at 2/3, you can see about where it goes. And this would actually be a nice easy one to do. But I'm going to go ahead and draw this onto a number line. So here I would have 0/3. Here I would have 1/3. Here I would have 2/3. And here I would have 1. Now again, just like we did before, I'm going to kind of sketch in where 1/2 would be. And this is about where 1/2 falls on this number line. So what you can see, and this is what you have to get comfortable with, I keep telling you guys this, is that 1/3 is between 0 and 1/2. So again, this is 1/2. It's between 0 and 1/2. I'll put my benchmarks in. Oh, and I should have written 3/3 here, sorry, or 1. So it's between 0 and 1/2, but it's closer to 1/2. Whereas 2/3 is between 1/2 and 1, but it's closer to 1/2. So now let me redraw a number line just for what we're doing. I'm going to go ahead and put my benchmarks in. And I would put my 2/3 right about here. Again, it's between 1/2 and 1, closer to 1/2. And this is something that you have to get comfortable with. So now let's do our 1/4. So let me think about it. Where would 1/4 go? Well, 1 is really close to 0, so I'm thinking it's going to be down here somewhere. And the way for me to really understand it is to remember that this is 0/4, this is 4/4, and this would be 2/4, would be equivalent to 1/2 because 2 is half of 4. Oop, let me slide this up. I'm sorry I went off frame. So 1/4 you can see is going to be between 0 and 2, and it's going to be right here. And it's going to be halfway between those. So now what we know is 2/3 is larger than 1/4. And the reasoning, if I was not using a number line, so let me remind you how to do this. So again, 2/3 is greater than 1/4. And my reasoning, and I'm going to kind of slide over here so I have more room, first of all, is that 2/3 is between, and I'm going to do this little abbreviation right now, is between 1/2 and 1, comma, closer to 1/2. My reasoning for 1/4 is that 1/4 is halfway between 0 and 1/2. So I'm using these little abbreviations right now. I think you guys can understand them.